Happy Friday, everyone. I'm going to give everyone just a little bit of time to join us. Today, we are joined by the Executive Director of the Marijuana Regulatory Agency in Michigan, Andrew Brisbo. Andrew, thank you so much. You are a very, very busy guy, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning.
My pleasure. I appreciate you waiting for me to get to my computer so we can start this.
Oh, you know, we're just flying by the seat of our pants here in the COVID era. Well, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe your career background pre-MRA.
I went to Central Michigan University and got a degree in recreation management. I always wanted to work in the public sector, but intended to operate a municipal parks and rec programs. But that didn't quite pan out the way I thought it would. But I started in state government in Detroit, working in the casinos as a regulation officer. Then I went on to manage Secretary of State branch offices before I got in and did occupational and health licensing. And that led to marijuana in sort of an accidental way when the bills passed in 2016 to create the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act. Someone needed to implement the systems of licensure and enforcement, and I had a background in that. So they asked me to do it, and I've just never left.
That's awesome. Well, we're happy to have you. You've done a great job so far. So when they offered that to you, were you like, oh my gosh, this is such a great, exciting opportunity to be a part of? Or were you just like, oh, what's this going to be like?
No, I was very much excited. I liked the idea of working on something new. Prior to that, I'd been administering laws that have been in place since the 70s or 80s. And it was all about interpreting that and relying on history. So I like being a part of something new. I was somewhat surprised as I continued to advance in this position that there was no one else seemed to want to get anywhere near it. But this seems new and exciting. Why not be a part of history in Michigan, play a role in determining how this regulatory system works, how the industry unfolds? I really like being a part of that.
Well, and it's great to have you here today because I saw on my Facebook timeline that 3 years ago today was the very first public hearing that you guys had. And I think it was a licensing board meeting. So it's crazy how things have evolved in the last 3 years.
There's certainly been a lot. I think I learn so much sort of month to month and year to year. It's incredible. When I look back at how I perceived things and what we knew about how the industry was going to work 3 years ago, if only we knew what we didn't know at the time. And that's just about the medical market. And to consider now, we have the adult use market layered on top of that. I feel like we're in a much better position. The knowledge of those of us that are in a regulatory position, legislators that are passing the laws, and industry members is so much further along, and it's to the benefit of the citizens of the state.
Absolutely. So how has the department been affected by the COVID crisis?
What's strange is when COVID first hit, and I was hearing so much about it, and a lot of my counterparts in other agencies were dealing with it directly. If they oversee health facilities and things like that, and the folks I correspond with at the governor's office, I remember thinking at the time, this doesn't seem like such a big thing. I don't think it's going to really affect us too much. And I could not possibly have been more wrong, obviously. So from an agency perspective, we deal with what a lot of other state agencies are dealing with. We have temporary layoffs of staff because of budget issues. We had to quickly transition and get all our folks out of the office. And the team at the MRA is pretty adaptable and dynamic. So within about a week, we shifted everyone to work from home. So of our 133 staff, I think we have now only one person goes to the office on a regular basis. And they've been remarkably effective at continuing to engage in our processes doing that. And that includes, the behind the scenes things like processing applications. We shifted to do remote inspections predominantly. So our field staff now are doing those via Zoom or FaceTime. And I think they're looking forward to getting back out into the field. They like working with people and establishing relationships. Obviously, it's a little bit easier to inspect a facility when you're seeing it firsthand versus trying to tell someone how to turn their phone so you can see things. So that's certainly been an impact, but we've been pretty effective. And then beyond that, trying to determine what guidance we should give the industry on how they should operate, to ensure that the employees at the facilities are safe, ensure that the consumers are safe, but still making sure that people have access to the regulated market, because as we've seen, one of the main goals of having a quality regulated market is consumers are going to choose to access products, and we want them to utilize the regulated market because the products there are safer. So if we don't have access, then that becomes a different sort of public health risk.
Right, right. And so what do you feel like has been your biggest challenge with the department in the COVID crisis?
I think it's how quickly things are changing and needing to absorb new information. I mean, I am not a public health expert. My team is not really made up of public health experts. I think we're very good at interpreting policy, working with stakeholders to develop and implement good policy, but don't necessarily have a background and expertise in, epidemiology or medicine and public health type experience. So that's very challenging. So we've had to rely on external resources, and what we really focused on with the orders that have been issued by the governor's office and the guidance issued by the CDC and DHHS is finding the best information that's most applicable to the industry and putting that all together. And I'm very proud of the bulletin our team put together that's adapted over time as the orders have changed. That's pretty comprehensive in terms of seeing what's required under the executive orders, as well as having access to additional resources that might just be helpful. And I know that guidance that we put out has been utilized by a lot of other states and been recognized nationally as being, very comprehensive. So I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, paving the way for other states. That's great. How do you expect the MRA, or when do you expect the MRA to be operational at full capacity again?
Oh boy, if I could read the tea leaves on that one, that is very hard to predict. I think one of the most challenging things with the pandemic is ensuring that things are continuing to trend in the right direction. There's been a lot of discussion about concerns about a second wave and needing to be prepared to adapt to that. With our internal operations, we are still functioning at close to capacity, just in slightly different ways. So I think the field inspections are a good example of that we're still getting it done so we can move applications through the process. But we'd like to have more hands-on. But I'm taking a very sort of conservative approach. I don't want to expose anyone to any additional risks on our team or in the facilities if it's not necessary. So we want to wait until we're sure that it's as safe as possible before we return to that. Continuing to monitor the executive orders. I think a lot of what's starting to slow us down at the MRA are obviously the layoffs. I mean, essentially we have staff working 20% fewer hours than we were before. There's no way to get around that affecting how efficiently the work gets done at the agency when you have half of your staff off on Monday and half of them off on Friday. So that's continuing through the end of next month, and then hopefully we'll move in a better direction. But with the budget situation as it is in the state, I think we could see some longer term implications when you have $2 billion shortfall in budget in fiscal 20 and a projected $4 billion shortfall in fiscal 21. We won't be untouched by that. It's not practical. So we have to be prepared to look at new and innovative ways to do things so we can keep things moving. And then the other piece of that is all other areas that we rely on for the industry to move forward are facing similar challenges. All of our licensees need to have some form of municipal approval. Well, municipal offices might be closed, or they might not be having public hearings on potential ordinances. That's slowing down progress. We often need to get records from other agencies like local courts. Many of those are shut down as well. So all of those things are sort of impacting progress. When all of that returns to normal, I think is quite a ways off. And then as it starts to shift back, then all this backlog of the work that's been trapped behind that will suddenly come rushing toward us as well.
Right. And you talked about innovating, as a department, and some of that innovation was teleconferencing, virtual meetings, virtually like doing inspection, things like that. Do you see any of those things continuing post-COVID?
Absolutely. I'm kind of an old school guy, and I've been somewhat rigid in my thinking as an administrator at times with my staff, where you come to work at 8, you leave at 5. That's how work goes. You show up here and you do your job. And as our team has transitioned to working from home and been successful, I think that helps us think like, well, maybe I need to be a little more open-minded about a lot of different ways to do things. I think there's likely to be some continuation of virtual inspections where possible in order to give us more opportunities to interact with facility operators in circumstances where it can be done without being physically on site. if we save our inspectors the drive time, they can cover more facilities in the same amount of time. So I think that'll be a part of it. We've always tried to be as open and transparent in our public meetings as possible. We've always streamed them on Facebook Live, but that's a one-way communication. When we had our public meeting this week, we had more virtual participants than I think we'd seen at a physical meeting in quite a long time. Back when the board was still there and they were all kind of a circus each time. We had a lot of people there then. But it gives access to everyone. I still like the idea of having a presence throughout the state and moving around so I can meet with people individually and in person. But if we continue to incorporate that Zoom component to the public meeting, then anyone, regardless of where they are, can still participate and have access and ask questions and provide feedback. So I could see that remaining a piece of it as well.
One of the biggest questions when people found out I was going to be interviewing was, do you think that curbside delivery will continue post-COVID?
Yes, and we actually have said that publicly. Our intention is to continue to allow that. Drive-throughs are currently prohibited in the rules. Under the allowances in the COVID bulletin, we've allowed them temporarily. But once that emergency is lifted, those will go back to being prohibited under the rules. But I think we're going to revisit both of those topics in the future in the rules to determine, in my mind, not whether or not to allow it, but whether there should be specific rules around safety protocols and security related to curbside and drive-throughs. But yeah, we have no intention of stopping curbside at any point.
That's great. And did the department see any sort of pushback when cannabis was deemed essential and the industry was able to continue operating, retail centers were able to continue selling?
Oh, yes. When issues like this arise, and that's hard to even say. I'm not sure any of us have ever seen issues like COVID-19 arise. This was unprecedented for everyone. And there was a lot of discussion around deeming certain types of businesses essential or non-essential. And that conversation about what that meant or what designations were for certain industries continued to evolve over time as well. My perspective was always that we have patients that are utilizing medical marijuana to treat debilitating medical conditions. So they need access to that medicine the same as anyone would need to a pharmacy. And because the medical and adult use commercial industries are so completely intertwined, there really didn't make any logical sense to stop one versus the other. I was firm in my perspective on that. I think the challenge really became as other industries and types of businesses were restricted, the recreational marijuana market was always what everyone pointed to as being the obvious example of inconsistencies. And that led to a lot of discussion about whether we should differentiate those. And in my mind, it just didn't make sense. We still have patients who are accessing products through the adult use market, even for medicinal purposes, as well as the fact that these facilities are the vast majority of them are operating in both markets. So if you cease half of their operation, the facility is still open. You're just going to put them in a position now where they're having to turn away half of their customers, and they'll be on the hook for explaining why they can't get access. We also saw that as the potential for an administrative burden when, we've seen the number of registered patients declining, likely not because their conditions went away, but because they're just utilizing the adult use market, who now would just want to transition back to being patients. And so we go through all this process of, taking 50,000 applications for registry cards to issue to folks during the time of COVID. And that just would have been putting a barrier in place that didn't need to be there.
Right. And I think I speak on behalf of the entire industry to tell you thank you for taking that firm stance and for deeming cannabis essential. So earlier this week, the MRA released a new set of administrative rules. So what are some of the updates that were made in that announcement this week?
In my mind, the big picture, most important thing is now we have a consolidated rule set that doesn't have a sunset or a timeline. It's been very challenging to get to this point where we have medical facility rules that have a sunset in November, adult use emergency rules that will expire in July, and then trying to move these rule sets forward when every topic under the sun is on the table all at once. it makes it very hard to talk about some complicated and nuanced issues that are covered in the rules when you have 130 pages of content that everyone's trying to look at all at once. So I think establishing this base framework that's consistent wherever possible for medical facilities and adult use establishments is the biggest win. And now we can move forward to start having policy discussions about the more technical and nuanced issues and give them the time they deserve to be talked about on their own without everything else on the table all at once. But I think that there are a lot of things that are good opportunities to treat businesses the same way, open up opportunities to address some of the issues we've seen. For example, we hear a lot about transporters maintaining custody of product for 48 hours. So we doubled that to give them a little bit more latitude. We opened up the door for greater participation on the lab side by allowing them to be co-located with another type of business. So if there's an existing environmental lab that wants to move into the marijuana space as a testing facility, they can do that without having to start an entirely new facility. We opened up the door for allowing additional recycling and composting of marijuana waste so that there's not so much waste that's being sent to landfills and can be reused as fertilizer. Changing the rules around delivery, I think was a big opportunity for us so that there could be expanded use of delivery services. I think one of the keys, as I mentioned before, to a successful regulated market is providing access to patients and adult use consumers in ways that the illicit market would otherwise fill. So the more we can utilize delivery services, making sure it's done safely and in accordance with the rules, will increase participation by the citizens in the regulated market. So now with dynamic delivery, instead of just being capped at 10 deliveries, they can take a certain amount of product with them that may not be accounted for a specific delivery. And then they can, as they're out on the road, they can be sent to make additional deliveries. We looked at establishing GMP and GACP standards for facility operators. So that's like good manufacturing practices. This is continuing along a pathway that we've utilized previously, which is looking at external standards and relying on third-party sort of accrediting bodies to review facility operations that will ease their regulatory burden at the state level. It frees up some capital, frees up some time for us to focus in on educating and working with other facilities that may be newer in the industry, and providing them some reductions in fees. And then I think the last thing that I've heard a lot about is opening up the door for more remediation and retesting. I know that's something that's been of a lot of concern from growers and processors. And in the end, as we looked at that, as long as we have those end result safety compliance tests. So this is a place where, making some of those changes, it puts the onus on the business to decide if they don't want to do intermediate testing, say before flower that's going to be processed into infused products. If they don't want to test it at the grow stage, they don't have to. If they want to take the business risk, because then if it fails at the end, we might not know where the problem occurred, but that's up to them as a business. And then allowing for the retesting and remediation, then as long as they can address the issues that cause the failures and then it can pass testing, then we can be reasonably assured that the products that are produced are safe for consumers. So I think that will, ultimately we want products produced in the market that pass the first time around. That's the most efficient and profitable way for the businesses to run, and I think ensures safety of consumers. But as the industry grows and learns, they need an opportunity to be able to remediate and retest some of those products without having to waste away everything that they produced, because that can be very challenging then to run a profitable business.
Right. And I know I heard this question yesterday from Rick Thompson, but in regards to remediated product, are there any plans to note that on like changing packaging requirements to note that to the consumer?
So we don't have that provision in the rules now. And I've heard that suggestion a couple of times now. So I think it's something we need to take a look at. The fact that the safety compliance tests that need to be passed for remediated products are the same as those that aren't remediated. I'd have to know more about what that designation means and why it's a value. I could see certainly producers probably wouldn't want that label on the product, and I don't want anything that's going to mislead a consumer to think that a remediated product for whatever reason is less safe to use. I wouldn't want to let them get to market if I didn't think that they were just as safe as products that weren't remediated. But that's, I mean, it's a possibility. That would take a rule change, though, to require that labeling.
Right. And MRA is always listening. That's what I've loved about your direction and how you've led the entire organization. Now, let's talk about some of the changes that have been made over the last several months in regards to Caregiver product into the system. What changes were made, and how is Caregiver product currently involved in the market?
Yeah. So as the industry was growing, and this is, you know, prior even to adult use being legalized, the retail establishments were there and ready to go, and obviously consumer demand was there as well. So the idea behind allowing some Caregiver product into the regulated market was always to supplement what was being produced in the regulated market. And we saw production in the regulated market continuing to grow, but with the expansion into adult use now, the consumer base, you know, went up dramatically, and obviously supply through the regulated market does not appear overnight. So as it stands now, we do still allow a certain amount of Caregiver product to come in through regulated facilities, but in the current portion of the phase-out process, the amount that a grower or processor can bring in is based on how much they brought in during the previous 3 months and how much they actually produced. And processors are now restricted to only bringing in Caregiver product to make infused products. So, you know, we need the entire supply chain to be successful, and you know, relying on the products that are produced in the regulated market ultimately is necessary for everyone in the supply chain to be successful. And that's where we want to transition, and also to ensure, you know, consistent and safe products for consumers. So that's going to be slowly phased out. And then, you know, by the time we get to October, we'll be completely reliant on the products that are produced through the regulated market.
And you guys have also made changes on how a patient can get their medical marijuana card. Can you talk about some of those changes that have been made?
So internal to the MRA, we've moved forward with an online application process. I think we actually started that in late, might have been 2018 or 2019, where we have an online application process. And in the initial stage of that, it is patient-only applications, so not a patient with a caregiver. But their physician had to be registered through the online system to do the online certification. So now just within the past couple of months, we've refined that. So now all patients can apply online, regardless of whether or not their physician is registered to do the online certification. So a patient who has another physician can still submit an online application. They just upload the physician's certification there as well. And in many cases, if the physician is registered with our online system, those checks can occur automatically, and the patient can actually be approved almost in real time. And then they receive an email validation that they've been approved that serves as a temporary registration that they can use until the card comes in the mail. So this was something that I'd been noodling with my staff for a long time, because we received so many requests from terminally ill patients that were seeking to use marijuana for end-of-life care. And even though we process 99% of the applications within 15 days, that might not be enough time for people that are seeking to use the products for that purpose. So this allows them, as they see their physician, to actually get that card on the same day and then get legal access to products, which is, you know, a good benefit for them. And we're going to continue to expand and explore those online application processes. You know, we're up to almost 60% of eligible transactions occurring online. So that helps us process more efficiently, not only the online, but those that still come in by paper. Now staff can focus their energy on those applications. And then the most recent change, which I can't take credit for, the governor effectuated this in one of her emergency orders, I think it's number 86, allows for telemedicine to be used by physicians for certifications. And the reason we couldn't do that at the MRA is there's a specific statutory requirement that the physician evaluation has to be done in person. So the governor suspended that through the emergency order, but that will only continue to be allowed while the state of emergency is in place. A permanent change to that, which we would support, would take a statutory change.
Okay. So how do you think Michigan has done in regards to the rollout of the medical marijuana program and the adult use? And looking back, is there anything that you would change?
Sure. Well, in my unbiased opinion, we did it the best. But we certainly have always tried to approach it as leveraging the best practices that we saw in other states, leveraging their successes, learning from their challenges. Very early on, I was meeting with counterparts in Colorado and Oregon and Washington and Alaska who would kind of come before us and try to learn from what they saw. I think we've always had a focus on efficiency, that delicate balance between business opportunity and consumer safety. So I think we've stayed true to that mission. And I think that's really helped us to be successful. We've been remarkably efficient in terms of implementing the program. I can't tell you how many times I heard as we implemented the medical program that we'd never get it done within a year. And then they said the same thing when we were trying to implement the adult use program. When you're restricted to those timeframes, I think there are always things you wish you had more time to focus on. And I would say with the adult use program, the one thing I wish we'd have had more time to do, we were so focused on IT systems and staffing and all the administrative rules as well. All of those pieces that have to be in place to even implement the baseline framework took so much energy. We didn't get quite as much time to focus on the social equity piece on the front end as I would have liked. I think when we're looking at equality of opportunity within the marijuana industry, the earlier you address that, the more effective and beneficial it is to those disproportionately impacted communities and those individuals who were individually impacted by the war on drugs. But it's going to continue to be a focus. We've already revised the program. We've expanded the social equity program, offering more opportunities. We're going to continue to evaluate that. But ideally, I would have liked to have had more time to work on that prior to the initial implementation even.
Can you talk a little bit about the social equity program and what that looks like right now?
Sure. So we've just expanded the number of qualifying communities from 41 to 184. We did that by reducing the threshold for the percentage of citizens in a municipality that live below the federal poverty limit. So 184 communities really covers a good portion of the state, now opens up the number of expected qualifiers, sort of doubles that on its face. And then additionally, my team and social equity led by Michelle Marshall has been really good about looking at data. So we have lots of people who've attended our work group sessions, had a lot of people who applied for qualifying under social equity. What we didn't have was a lot of individuals then applying for pre-qualification and licensure. So when we looked at that data, we had over 200 social equity qualifiers. And at the time we looked at it, it's 0 license applications. We said, well, that's not getting to where we need to be. So let's find out why. And they conducted a survey. They called every single social equity qualifier to ask them, what's stopping you from applying for licensure? And at the time, a lot of our focus and energy was on the social equity outreach presentations that were like big group presentations. And we did that survey in February. Over 30% of the applicants were saying they needed more one-on-one assistance with the application process itself. So we sort of pared back the outreach and devoted a lot more time of the staff to working with those individuals one-on-one. And so now we're down to 11% of the applicants in the survey we did last week who say that one-on-one assistance is their main hurdle. So that's good progress there. But looking at that survey back in February, one of the other big things was we saw lots of people who had trouble meeting the residency requirements. Individuals who may have been impacted by the war on drugs or, were living in poverty don't always have consistent housing and they're not always staying in the same place. So their residency was moving around and they either didn't meet the residency requirement because they hadn't been living in one of those communities for 5 years or had trouble finding paperwork to prove that that's where they live. So we expanded that, just looking at 5 years cumulatively out of the last 10 years, and also giving them an opportunity to operate a facility in a different community. Detroit's the best example now that has a lot of citizens who qualify for the program, but you can't open an adult use facility in Detroit yet. So if they're ready to move forward, now they can go to any other community and still have some of the benefits of the program. And on the opposite side of that, individuals who have specific criteria but aren't from one of those communities. So if you have marijuana-related conviction or you've been a caregiver, you can still qualify for those fee reductions regardless of your residency. So really trying to hone in more and offer more opportunity for individuals who have felt the impacts of the war on drugs, get those reach those qualification limits and getting access to the services. And then we have to continue, I think, to address some of the other concerns that arise about operating a small business. Our agency is very good at helping people navigate the licensure process, but we are not necessarily small business experts. So we need to help make those connections as well. And we see a lot of the struggles coming in with navigating municipal processes, how to acquire real estate, how to get access to capital. All of those things are important when it comes to not only starting your small business, and that's cannabis or non-cannabis, but being successful long-term. We need to help facilitate access to some of those other resources and expertise that we may not have inside the agency.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about the application process. So Michigan, unlike other states, requires applications to disclose their bank records, litigation, tax liens, criminal records, etc., and providing ongoing responses to analysts. If you miss one document and can't explain something properly, the stats have shown that you are likely to be denied that license. Other states, Illinois, for example, simply do their own background checks and verify the applicant doesn't have any disqualifying events. In Illinois, they do not have any, they have to provide any documentation or supporting evidence. Many people of color feel like the Michigan's application process, it's discriminatory against minorities and was set up this way to keep them from getting a license. The current social equity application is the same as a regular application which is why many people of color don't even apply. You know, given the current climate that we are in, has there been any sort of discussion at the MRA to revamp the application process?
So I think a lot of those concerns about applicants being denied for failing to provide information on the front end was all in the board era. We've denied very few applications after the executive order that shifted that responsibility to the agency. And almost all of those denials are, those are available for public review. Those that have actually led to denial that has been upheld after appeal are really based on substantive issues. So I think that perspective is based a lot on what was happening very publicly in the board era. And we're always looking at ways to revamp the process to make it more efficient for all applicants, but with a specific focus on social equity. And there certainly is a lot required of the application process that's based in statute. So we don't really have control at the agency level to say we shouldn't require these things. That's part of what the law requires for the application. But if we're looking at the adult use side, that is a fairly simple application process. It's not nearly as extensive as what was required under the medical statute. And as we continue to move forward, I think as an agency, our focus is on trying to go with a more simple approach. We obviously see the industry trending toward adult use anyway, so we want to move in that direction. One of the biggest challenges, I think, for social equity participants and people of color who weren't involved on the medical side is the statutory restriction currently in place in the ballot initiative that you have to be licensed on the medical side in order to be eligible on the adult use side. That restriction is one that was time limited. At most 2 years, we'll be able at the agency level to remove that restriction at the end of this year so that any individual will be eligible for licensure. And we've also, on the medical side, under the new rules, reduced the capitalization requirement as well. So that should really help open the door for more individuals to qualify. But when we've looked at the processes through a social equity lens, I think we are very focused on how to achieve success for those applicants, within the confines of what's required in the law.
Right. What do you see our medical program looking like 5 years from now?
I think a lot of what we're talking about now is how we fold the two together to be more consistent and efficient. Honestly, as it stands now, the way the law defines what marijuana is in Michigan, I think in the commercial sector is fundamentally different than a lot of other states. The medical patients are required to have a qualifying condition, but when it comes to the commercial market, the growing of plants, the cultivation, the processing, the products that are available, they're the same. So when I look at that through the prism of just being sort of logical, we're issuing 2 licenses to facilities to do one thing based on who it's going to end up being sold to. I think there's more efficient ways to go about that. And so we're examining that now, and I think there'll be an opportunity for some policy shifts that remove some of those barriers and bring down some of those boundaries. Even to the last question, the medical market in Michigan will be, in terms of the number of participants, less than 1/10 of the size of the adult use market. and yet the burdens in the law to get into the medical side are much higher than those on the adult use side. So that really doesn't make a lot of sense when our testing standards are the same in both markets, save one particular test. So I think we're going to look at ways in which we can consolidate that framework for more consistency. We've taken the first step by doing that in the administrative rules, and I think we're going to continue to explore that in terms of policy shifts that we may request in the laws themselves.
What kind of relief would you see if something changed on a federal level?
You know, that's tough to say. I could see that making our lives as administrators much more complicated, potentially, depending on how it goes. I think it's of critical importance from an industry perspective, and I've advocated at the federal level particularly for banking relief. I think that's one thing that seems like a pretty simple fix to allow. Really, what needs to happen is banks need to have some assurances that federal regulators won't come after them for banking the industry. That's sensible. I think at the minimum, decriminalization at the federal level also reduces some of the burdens, some of the stigma. So there are some things that need to happen in the short term at the federal level. When you really get into descheduling or rescheduling, those are things that are much more nuanced and complex. I think eventually that's going to happen. How that impacts how we do things at a state level could be dramatically different depending on how exactly they approach that at the federal level. So if we look at what's happening in hemp now, it is legalized federally, and the federal government is setting sort of the baseline standards for state level programs in terms of what you absolutely have to have in order to keep things legal federally. So something like that is, in my mind, why we continue to push for high standards in Michigan. I want the businesses in Michigan to be prepared to be successful at a regional and national level as soon as there's some federal framework to operate under. So if we have standards that we assume will be the baseline for what the feds will require, our businesses don't have to shut down and retool. They'll be ready to play in that broader space immediately, and that will give them the edge over counterparts in other states.
Right. Municipalities, they seem to be a thorn in the side for a lot of these licensed businesses. Do you see the rules changing around the municipalities' authorities to opt in or opt out, either medical or adult use?
So one of the things we're pursuing in terms of policy shifts is more consistency there, at least. I think one of the challenging things for industry participants as well as for municipal officials is understanding their slightly different role in the medical versus adult use markets. On the medical side, a state license is completely dependent on having an authorizing municipal ordinance. On the adult use side, it's based on not having a prohibitive ordinance. But that's very complicated to understand, and we've had to go to court about how that applies as well. When you have, the restriction in MRA is non-compliance with ordinances. And there can be a lot of different ordinances that may play into running an establishment. It's not just many municipalities use police ordinances in terms of their licensing piece of it, but there are zoning ordinances that apply as well. So I think municipalities need more clarity on exactly what they're supposed to do when it comes to adopting ordinances. As I think the issue of marijuana and cannabis becomes a little less politically sensitive, I think that helps as well. But we also see a lot of municipalities now struggling with the social equity issue as well. And that's something I know is very important in a lot of communities and is a challenge to figure out how exactly to do that right, especially when the medical market in a lot of municipalities is somewhat mature, and now you're moving into the adult use market. Obviously, all the medical participants want to expand into the adult use market. There are new individuals who want to get involved from the adult use side. So it's not an easy issue. I'm not a municipal expert, but I know on this particular topic, municipal officials are just sort of overwhelmed, I think, in a lot of cases with their responsibilities in adopting these ordinances. So I think clarity at the state level in law would help.
Awesome. Well, that's most of the questions I had for you today, Andrew. You have done a really great job. And I have to say, I feel like our state is very fortunate to have you sitting in this seat and to be leading this program. You have done a really exceptional job listening to the industry and having great conversations that continue to progress the law. And I do think that other states that implement their laws moving forward should look at Michigan as a great example for doing so.
Well, thank you, Jamie. We strive to be a good collaborator and don't want to, I never approach a conversation as though I have all the answers. I think it's very important to hear out different perspectives. So it's good to hear, at least from your point of view, that we're successful in that endeavor.
Anytime. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you again, Andrew. It was great having you talk to us, and thank you for the work that you continue to do for us. Don't forget to join us for our next networking event on Wednesday. It's at 4 o'clock. You can go to cincyconnects.com to register. Until then, have a great and wonderful weekend. Bye.